When I try to do everything that everybody else's job, I make them small. I take away their power.
Yes.
I don't give them the opportunity to grow and to live into their skills. I actually think that ambition is much more seasonal, kind of like a perennial flower, whereby you have a seedling of desire, I want to grow, and you drop it into the ground, and you take care of the inner and outer environment, and you have this momentary flowering in the sun, and then the seasons change. So painful ambition is driven by our core wounds, and purposeful ambition is when...
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Show. I just had the most interesting, fascinating conversation with Amina AlTai, a holistic business and career coach. She is a proud Middle Eastern immigrant, and she's a chronic illness advocate. But she's also like a leading coach to notable leaders and executives and founders. Amina's mastery is connecting us to our own brilliance, teaching us to live and lead from it each day. She wrote this book that I think you guys are going to love. It's called The Ambition Trap: How to Stop Chasing and Start Living. But what we talk about in this interview is really how to know if your ambition is painful or purposeful. And if it's painful, as mine was in my youth, what are the things that can shift? What can you do to change it to be more purposeful? She's been incredibly successful in her own life. And of course, most of the time you teach what you most need to learn. So she had her own health crisis that sort of led her to writing this book that I think you guys are going to love. So I hope that you enjoy this interview as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Terri Show. I'm so excited to welcome Amina AlTai to the Terri Show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
When I was just telling the audience at the top, when I first saw the name of your book, The Ambition Trap, I was like, wow. If this is literally the book I needed when I was in my 20s, never would you have been like, wow, is your ambition a trap? I would have been like, no, it's amazing. But it was most definitely a trap. So the name of the book, you guys, is The Ambition Trap: How to Stop Chasing and Start Living. So before we get into it, and we're going to get into it, I want to ask you a question I love to ask everyone, because you came to this exact moment in your life, exact thing that you're doing, for a reason. So if you were a Marvel movie character, you'd have an origin story that would explain to the audience, like, wow, this is how I ended up here. So what would your origin story be, Amina?
Yeah. So I always joke that I wrote the book called The Ambition Trap because I was a walking ambition trap. I am the child of immigrants. I entered the workforce deeply boundaryless and codependent, and I wish I had your book when I entered the workforce. Yeah. And I was rewarded for being the first one in, the last one out, and a lot of it had to do with identity too. And I, in my late 20s, burned out and developed 2 autoimmune diseases. And it happened in a very dramatic fashion where I got a call from my doctor, and she said, and this was my 7th doctor, of course, and she said, if you don't go to the hospital now, instead of going to your client, you are days away from multiple organ failure. And so, yeah, so it was like this just stop moment in my life where I had to stop what I was doing and the way that I was working because it was deeply broken, and I had to choose another way. And over the course of several years, went back to school, amassed these tools, and started teaching others. And then I had a front row seat to some of the most ambitious humans in the world, from Olympians to Fortune 100 leaders to VC-backed founders. And I was like, we all have the same patterns. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. And then in 2020, it sort of all came to a point where at the height of the social justice uprisings, I ended up coaching a handful of celebrity girl bosses who were canceled. And my book is not an analysis of cancel culture whatsoever, but I saw these patterns mirrored back again. And that's where I came up with the framework around painful versus purposeful ambition.
Wow. It's just so many things to unpack in that entire story. I don't even know where to begin. So let's start with painful versus purposeful. Make the distinction. How, in your estimation, what is the difference, and how do we know which one we are doing or which one we're subscribing to?
Yes. So painful ambition is driven by our core wounds. So there's this beautiful body of work from Lise Bourbeau, who's a Canadian psychologist, and she talks about the 5 core wounds of rejection, abandonment, humiliation, betrayal, and injustice. And we each have 1, 2, 3, or all 5 of those wounds, right? And you could have the most magical parents on the planet and still emerge with core wounds because it's just a very human rite of passage.
Yep.
And as a result of those core wounds, we wear corresponding masks. So if you have the rejection wound, you wear the mask of avoidance. If you have the betrayal wound, I'm raising my hand, you wear the mask of control. And you can imagine if our ambition is coming from that place, it's going to be wobbly. So that's painful ambition. And purposeful ambition is when we've done some work on those core wounds and we're coming from a more purposeful place. It's more connected to our truth versus that striving, pain, pressure, external validation come from.
Oh, it's such a great distinction. You know, I think about for myself, like going from having a career in entertainment and, you know, being ridiculously ambitious, like literally leaping up the ladder 4 steps at a time, you know, and how it was only in therapy that if you would ask me in my 20s, like, you know, was there anything quote unquote wrong with my ambition? I would have been like, no, it's just, I'll just do it longer and harder than you. Like, I just will literally never quit no matter what happens, you know? And through therapy, because how I imagined my success and my ambition was that I was running towards something. And then the realization in therapy was that I was actually running away from one of my core wounds the whole time.
Exactly.
Feeling the not enoughness of it all, which brings us to this. So in the book, you talk quite a bit about women in particular feeling caught between too much and not enough. Can you say more about that?
Yes. So you can't separate ambition and identity. And that's why I wanted to write this book, because there's a lot of books about ambition. Nobody was redefining it for us. And I think we need to, particularly at this moment in time. And then they weren't talking about it in the context of identity. And lots of us experience a penalty around our ambition. So ambitious women are seen as too much, and aggressive, ambitious men, we celebrate them. And then women of color are actually the most ambitious cohort in the workplace, and they experience the most microaggressions, the most headwinds. And so we really had to talk about this in the context of identity. Oh, now I've forgotten what your original question was.
Talking about being caught between too much and not enough.
Yes. Okay, great. Yeah. So I felt like we really had to bring in the identity piece. But there's 2 sides of this conversation that I felt was really important. There's a mindset piece, right? There's stuff for us to own. There's always stuff on our side of the street. And also there's a systemic conversation. So, of course, we have to look at our core wounds. We have to clean up our side of the street around what we're running away from. And also, we can't pretend that we're not in this system that is reinforcing stories and biases that has us question ourselves and then create certain impulses, right? If we've internalized the story that we are not enough, then we're going to overwork, right, to try and prove our worthiness. We'll tip into burnout, but then we're not represented in the highest ranks of organizations, further perpetuating, maybe we're not enough, or maybe we're too much, maybe our ambition is too big, right? So it's just this really impossible catch-22.
It is such a double bind, as we would say therapeutically, like you're just fucking screwed either way.
Yep.
And when you think about what the message is that women get in particular, because it's not just you're too much or not enough in the workplace. It's now, what does that mean about your value as a wife and a mother, if that's the route you've gone in your life? If you have a massive career, immediately there's some assumption about what kind of a mother you are or are not. There's mom guilt is so real. It is something that so many women in my crew just struggle with. You feel like you literally, they're all high functioning codependents, but they're doing all the things for all the people, but still just feeling like endlessly failing at any given moment in time, feeling like you're not giving enough to the work or you're not giving enough to the home life. So what do you do with, how do you walk people through this sort of juxtaposition in the book, or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we really have to do the core wounds work, right? So what are the stories that we're telling ourselves about what we need to achieve, who we need to be, what success looks like both at work and at home and out in the world and in our friendships. And you know this, right? As a therapist, you have a front row seat to all of this, but most of the operating systems that we're working from, we're not conscious of, right? So the cities we choose to live in, the partners we choose, the work we choose to do are driven by mechanisms we're unaware of. So we have to rewrite our stories. What is our definition of success? And it changes every season. So can we give ourselves the grace to let that story and that definition evolve every season as well? So how do you define success as a parent, as somebody in the workplace, as a friend, and based on the season that you're in?
I love that so much because it's so true. It's like when you think about in life. So I'm 61 now, so I'm in a different season of my life than I was when I was 31, for sure. And my values have my core values are the same, but what I value, like what I want to be spending my time doing, where I want to be doing things, how much stuff I want to do, what I want to do at night or on the weekends, all of those things have changed because, as you said so succinctly, each season of our life, we change. Like, we literally become different people, and it makes sense. If you are someone who has young children, that's a season. If you are single and going to be partnered, that's a season. If you're single and never going to be partnered, that's a season too, right? Because all of those things dictate what we're going to be doing. So I wanted to ask you about the whole cancel culture online thing. From where you were sitting during that time. How was that for you to sort of be on the inside of this? I don't know what to say. I've had some up close and personal experiences with very close friends.
Yeah.
Then I just found it fucking excruciating.
Yeah.
So how about you?
It was excruciating. Oh. And again, to use your language, it's a double bind, right? So most of the people that I was working with were VC-backed founders, right? And so you're a woman that got venture funding, which means you're of the 2.7%, right? So you are the extreme minority, and you probably worked so hard to get there.
Like, so hard.
So hard. And then in the venture space, they want you to grow so fast and at these unsustainable paces that have you cut essential corners, right? So we cannot solely place the onus on these people. We have to look at the system that they're operating in. Yeah. And I just watched these women be raked over the coals, and a lot of the times take hits for other people. And it wasn't a systemic conversation, right? Of course, there were things on their side of the street that they needed to look at, right? And, as a woman of color, right, I was holding space for a lot of white women. And so, I saw some spaces where they couldn't see themselves. That is true. And I just saw them being held to these impossible standards inside of a system that did not set them up for success, and with people that were not taking accountability for their stuff that they put in there too. And it just felt absolutely impossible and soul-crushing for these people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a wake up, and yet sadly for a lot of the, there's been different eras of the canceling. I'm going back to sort of the original, which was a whole bunch of years ago now at this point. And yet I think that it was a systemic wake up to a degree, and that, I don't know, I feel like every revolution there's going to be, collateral damage, or people are going to be called out where you're like, is it right? Is it fair? Are they really racist? Or did they do the wrong thing? Or is it just tone deaf? Either way, whoever it was that was pointed out and this happened to took a hit for everybody. Other white-owned shit in the world, where they were suddenly now, everyone was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Am I doing this wrong? Am I being tone deaf myself?
Yeah, and listen, I think that's a worthwhile exercise for us to ask ourselves, right? I'm asking myself those questions all the time too. And also, to your point, they were really taking a hit for everybody. And, also, like, I'm a proponent of transformative justice work. And in that work, we call people in. We don't call people out, right? Because we believe everybody deserves the dignity of relearning and repairing harm. But listen, you can't do that if you've just been, decimated.
Yeah. Exactly. Your whole entire everything just blown up. Just, oh my God, so bad. All right. So question about, let's talk a little bit about ambition. Sort of, what does it look like post lean in? And for those who are not, listen, I know, but some people may not know. So talk a little bit about that, the lean in, and then what is it looking like post lean in?
Yes. So the lean in movement was very much about, how do we lean in harder to work? How do we do more? How do we say yes to more? How do we kind of dial up the masculine, right? And, there's a time and a place for everything. And also, I think so many of us saw that way of working does not work for everyone. And in the book, I talk about how sort of culturally we understand ambition as more for more's sake all the time. And that just leads to burnout, upholds oppressive systems, all the things. And so I actually think that ambition is much more seasonal, right? It's kind of like a perennial flower whereby you have a seedling of desire, I want to grow, and you drop it into the ground, and you take care of the inner and outer environment, and you have this momentary flowering in the sun, and then the seasons change, and the petals fall off, and you go back underground where it's fallow until you're nurtured enough that you want to rise again. And I think it's just a much more generous and generative way to think about ambition, because it's humanly impossible to do the more for more's sake all the time, and it costs us, and I think so many of us are so done paying the tax.
Yeah, dude, it's just the burnout. But it's so, it just struck me what you were saying. It's so specifically female for us to value our cycles, right? There is a season of growth. There's a season of being fallow. And when we don't, and I can say, I mean, personally, I've definitely been guilty of the more for more sake.
Same.
Of course, if you'd asked me if that was what I was doing, I wouldn't have thought I was.
Yeah.
But it's only in being able to slow down in the last 5 to whatever years, and I've been doing this for a long time, so that means driving and grinding for so long as well. And yet, I think that for me, depending on what you're doing, right, I feel like there's a lot of justification for the rise and grind, especially for clients of mine who are in like nonprofit work, or they're doing like super important stuff. They're, helping survivor, like, you know what I mean? Where they feel like there's no, I wrote about one of these women who ran a domestic violence shelter, one of my clients, in Boundary Boss. And it was like, there was no rest for the weary, because being of service in that way, it just felt like, but it is an emergency. This person needs emergency shelter away from a domestic violence situation with her 6-week-old. Like, I'm like, yes, and you have a staff.
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to be you. I'm not saying let's not provide the thing, but it was almost like she was felt like it had to be her.
Yes.
And you're like, I don't know. I mean, where does delegation and being able to not micromanage come into this whole thing with ambition for you?
Yeah, I love this question. Well, so painful ambition has a couple of hallmarks, and one of them is toxic individualism, right? This idea that like I have to do it all myself and it's all on me, it's all on my shoulders, right? When we download the work onto our individual shoulders, we make it unsustainable. And then we're only in our career for a season, not a lifetime, right? If we want to be in it for a lifetime.
Yep.
And so we need the power of we, right? We need collaboration, we need community, we need to do it together in order for it to be sustainable. But we have this idea that is, again, sort of systemically perpetuated, that we have to do it as an individual. That's the only way to be valid and worthy, but it takes us out.
It really does. And I think that from a psychological point of view, I can see that this individualism, I call it hyper-independence, there's so many reasons why we come to that, I would say honestly would be a way to describe it, maybe, because of not trusting other people to do it, not trusting other people to do it right, especially if you're a perfectionist. If you're a high-functioning codependent, one thing you really don't want is to owe anybody shit. You do not want to be vulnerable to others, and you really don't think people are going to get it done the way that it needs to be done. So there's a whole bunch of that you have to go up against. And the way that I try to teach it with, I teach young therapists, it's like you have to be the best trainer of other people. My mother had said to me many, many years ago when I was complaining about, one of my boyfriends, I was living with him and I was like, he doesn't know how to vacuum and he doesn't know how to brown garlic. This guy just burns garlic every time he tries to do it. I don't get it. And she was like, well, first of all, your father never touched a vacuum or a pen, so let's start there. And secondly, she was like, Terri, if you need everything to be done your way, a very specific way, then you will end up like me, doing it all and doing it all alone.
Mic drop.
I was like, I do not want that. But it made me really think. She's like, just a half-assed vacuum job is better than no effort and no thought about the home that you're sharing. Right? She's like, just don't be a weird perfectionist and just be grateful that somebody is trying to add. And I think that there's something to that with this type of the painful ambition that you're talking about, is that there's this lack of trusting others. But when you're really building an empire, you have to hire and train and create a culture where people feel responsible. Right? It can't just be you, because when you're micromanaging, you're also the only one who feels responsible
Right.
for it really going, because you're not letting other people own their parts, right?
100%. Yeah. So the betrayal wound basically is when we have the betrayal wound, the mask we wear is control. And as a high functioning codependent myself, right, that is my signature. And I think that's partly what broke my body to a certain degree. I was like, I'll control everything, but you can't. There's like two things you can actually control in the world, right? And, the other thing that I came to realize, and this is like the most important reframe for me, is that when I try to do everything that everybody else's job, I make them small. I take away their power.
Yes.
I don't give them the opportunity to grow and to live into their skills. And I absolutely do not want to make anybody small.
Nope. No, it's so good, though. It's like the realization that even though, we talk about intention and impact, and even though that may not be your intention, we're not powerful enough to change the impact. Right. And so it has to be changed behavior. Mm-hmm. It has to be that you are teaching someone to do something and then letting them do it. And how do we do that, right? When you are, like if you have a team, let's just say, in my situation where I have a team of people, it's like I went from being a crazy micromanager, codependent, unsuccessful because it is unsustainable. So that was the painful ambition. Like I was getting it done, but at the expense of myself for sure. And then realizing, what does a good leader look like? How do we teach people to come to me with a problem? If you come to me with a problem, you must have a solution. Yeah. If you, right, like if you're, I don't want more options. I want to know what you think is optimal. That's what I'm paying you for. What do you think? Tell me your deductive reasoning. Share with me why you think that's the way we should do it. Fight for what you think we should do. In the beginning, when I was sort of making this change, people would come and be like, well, we could do it this way, or we could do it that way, or we could do that. I'm like, listen, I have so much decision fatigue. You giving me 44 ways we could do it when I don't give a shit I only want us to do it the best way. I need some guidance from you because I'm not a tech person or I'm not a social media expert or whatever the thing is,
Yeah, and they're the expert, exactly. There's this great model that I teach in leadership training. It's about situational leadership, and it's based on people's skill set and motivation. So if you have somebody that's highly skilled and highly motivated, we can be super hands-off with how we lead them and how we mentor them. If we have somebody that's low skill, low motivation, it might require a little bit more, right? But it invites us to flex based on who we're working with.
Oh, that's so good, though. So I want to go back to that. The way we're managing people, if you have someone who is high skilled and high motivation, there's less need to sort of be micromanaging because they have the things you need to get it done.
Exactly.
And especially if they're an expert. It's funny, I have a designer who's just great and who I barely have to say anything to. They know he helped me create my entire aesthetic for my business. But like creating something, I know I don't need to be like, use this font. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's got to pick the right pictures. Exactly. And it's such a relief.
It is.
But it took, of course, years for me to trust that was the case, So in the book, you also write about toxic clickiness and ambition. And I would love it if you would say more about toxic clickiness.
Yeah. I want to say one last thing on that last point, though, is I don't know if this is true for you, but one thing that I realized about myself in my business is I wasn't hiring people that were high skill and high motivation. I was hiring the opposite because I could then prove out the hypothesis that I need to keep controlling and need to keep owning things. So if anybody else who's listening has felt that way, I see you, I feel you, and we can evolve from that.
Wait, I love it. Stay there for a minute. That's so good, and it's so true. And I will take it down a notch. When I was interviewing back in the day, it was like I was auditioning for them. Like
that sounds so real. I'm sure I did some of that too.
Literally doing the worst job ever. Being like, so this is what it's like, and this was amazing to be on this shit. Like, until I hired someone who knew what they were actually doing, and they were like, how about we'll pay them X amount of money let's give them a project and see if they can do it on time, and let's make them take a personality test. And I was like, what? What are we doing?
We're making them audition for us?
They're like, yeah, because you're going to be paying them, remember? Anyway, okay, back to toxic clickiness.
Yes. So what I was noticing is inside the ambition conversation is there's a lot of scarcity inside the conversation, right? And because so much of that is because, we look around a room, especially at the upper echelons of organizations, and we don't see people that look like us. So we feel like we need to fight out our sisters or people that identify like us to get that one spot, right? And so this, again, kind of goes back to those two parts. If we want to look at our own mindset and where we're coming from a place of scarcity, where we feel like if they're shining at me means that I can't shine. If they get something, it means that I can't get something.
Yep.
Like, we want to look at our side of the street there too, but it is also a systemic issue, right? Where we need to be making space for more people, more women of color,
Yep.
more LGBTQIA plus people that we just haven't made meaningful space for. But there's so much that we can do on our side of the street. But I do think that scarcity in lots of ways is systemically engineered, right? If like we keep people distracted by this idea of scarcity, they'll fight each other out and then we won't have to deal with it.
Yep. I think that that's absolutely accurate. And really, that's something that the whole Black Lives Matter and everything that came up from about 5 years ago was happening in 2020, where it was really thinking about what's the difference between, it's not being anti-racist and not being a racist are two different things. And the active act of pulling someone else's chair up with doing something with your own privilege, that is actually something. Whether it's having people on your, a platform that you have that you can expose. I've started doing like Monday posts. It was all like therapists and coaches of color, like just whatever you can actually do. But there's a requirement, though, of getting over your own scarcity.
Yes.
Right? Because when you're being a woman of any color, you're in a marginalized group.
Yes.
Then being a woman of color, you're in a more marginalized group, right? And so in the beginning, when this was happening, there was a lot of conversations in white spaces of being like, I'm not even at the party yet. Like, I don't even have a chair at the table. Like, how am I pulling up? People are telling me I should be passing up speaking gigs and handing it to a woman of color. I haven't even gotten any speaking gigs yet, And I'm like, okay, well, you can only do it from where you are.
Yeah.
But you can do it.
Yeah.
You can start following influencers of color. You can decide that you will shine whatever light you do have to help and supporting other women.
Yeah.
Other women leaders, other women entrepreneurs,
Absolutely. And what's so interesting? Yes, and I think we can kind of like act our way into or figure our way out into it, right? Because sometimes it's really hard when we're operating in a vacuum. But just using the book process that I've been going through as an example, it's like I think less than 2% of published authors are Middle Eastern, let alone Middle Eastern women. So like I'm super in the minority. But I was seeing all of these other amazing women do these things. And I was just getting really excited about it. So I started sharing their work. And then they were like, oh my God, it's so nice that you're sharing my work. Let me share your work. And then we get the power of we, right? So it's like you can kind of fumble your way through it and you'll start to find your community. And just by shining a light on somebody, then they're going to bring their light back around. And actually, it grows exponentially rather than getting smaller, which I think is a really cool thing to see.
Oh, it's such a great point of the amplifying someone else's ripple just will naturally amplify your own. And really that doesn't have to be the reason to do it. It just is a byproduct of doing it. That's why I love having a podcast, because it's also so much easier to get into the orbits of people who I respect or whose work I really love. Because instead of being like, hey lady, what can you do for me? Yeah. It's like, hey, you have an amazing book. Come on my pod and let me share it with 1 billion people. Yeah. Like, okay, that's great. And then a lot of times people will also have podcasts and they'll invite you or they won't. Yeah. But it's being in conversation. And I feel like for me, I'm so lit up by smart anybody, but mostly smart women, because that's really who I'm drawn to. Smart and articulate women. You fall right in there, my friend. Where it feels good to come from a place of that there is enough. Yeah. Like someone else cannot take your shit because they really can't. And that's not to minimize the fact that some people, white in particular, have more access than other people. That's a fact. So I feel like both of those things can exist, but that generosity of spirit, it also just feels good. And as women, think about, right, how we, they did that study, I think it was Harvard did that study about, they were seeing all these scientists in a lab, and when the women were upset, they would find another woman and they would tend and befriend, right? This is that very famous study. Yeah. And then when men were upset, they isolated. They didn't really go and find, but women for sure found other women. And so as women, we're so, I don't know, I'm such a girl's girl. Same. Not to be confused with a girly girl, because they're different, but in respect to just wanting to and loving to support women, and coming from a family. Yeah, I have 3 older sisters. I don't know. I just always got it.
Yeah.
So I love that this whole thing about you're sort of decoding ambition for women in particular, of like, how do we do it in a way that we don't have to be a part of this toxic clickiness, and we don't have to be in competition with other women.
Yeah.
Right? So let's talk a little bit about that. Ambition doesn't have to be a competition.
Yeah. So again, kind of one of the pillars of painful ambition is this strong desire to win no matter the cost. And there's nothing wrong with winning, right? Like we all love a gold medal. But the no matter the cost piece gets a little tricky, right? Because the cost is either us and our bodies or our sisters or whomever, right? And when we're not concerned about the collateral damage, we've tipped into a difficult place. And so I want us to really sit with that, right? I think we've been kind of fooled into this conversation of like there's only one spot and we have to beat everybody out. And the more we buy into that, the more we're going to live into this dysfunctional relationship with our ambition. But again, kind of going back to the power of we, if more of us live into purposeful ambition, then the system has to kind of move with us, right? We're saying, hey, I'm not going to do the thing. I'm not going to hurt myself. I'm not going to hurt these other people to get to the goal. Actually, now you need to bend and accommodate us.
Right. Right. So let me ask you about your own, how did you come back from your burnout and your 2 autoimmune, very scary diagnoses?
Yeah, really bit by bit. I honestly think it was sort of, for me, one foot in front of the other. There's never been like a single thing that's like, oh, that thing changed my life, right? I think it's like been a consistent 15-year journey of just, keep doing the work, keep staying in the work. And it's really awesome. Like at this point for one of my autoimmune diseases, I don't have antibodies. So I'm like, we're doing great.
Oh, amazing.
But yeah, it was really multifactorial, right? There was a lot of work that I had to do in therapy, literally like 20 years, all kinds of therapy too, like EMDR, hypnotherapy, CBT, like all of it to repattern and rewire, and, different lifestyle choices and nervous system work and all of it. And it's so cool. I was sharing this with somebody else recently. I was wrapping up a coaching session with a client, and this is like the best piece of feedback I've ever gotten, and so different to what I would have gotten 20 years ago. But at the end of our engagement, she said, "Thank you so much for taking such good care of yourself so you could role model to us that you can be an entrepreneur and you can live this way, and that so you can take such good care of us too, right? You're taking such great care of yourself so you can take such good care of us." And that was not the life that I lived 20 years ago, right? I showed up bedraggled and disgruntled and crawling across the finish line because I'd hurt myself so much to get to the goal.
Yeah.
And so, it's just been a moment-to-moment, choice-to-choice way of living.
Yeah.
And listen,
okay.
I get it wrong sometimes too.
Of course you do, because who doesn't?
Exactly.
But the fact that you get it right enough that someone actually made mention of it tells you that you've changed your life, and that you changed the way that you relate to your own ambition, and changed the way that you relate to working and all of that. I have a question for you that's not related, but it's always related because I love boundaries. So personally, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle, and how have you overcome it if you have?
Yeah. Oof, I mean, family boundaries, so hard because I come from 2 collectivist cultures where like codependency and collectivism sit a little too close together for my liking, right?
Yep.
And so like sometimes the idea of setting a boundary, especially in collectivist cultures, is like, you're doing what now? Like, this is not how we operate culturally speaking, right?
Yeah.
So that's been really hard. I talk about this a little bit in the book, but, my dad struggled with his mental health and had like PTSD and borderline and narcissistic tendencies, like the whole fun gamut. Yep. And so that's been a really tough person to set boundaries with. And it's so challenging because I love my dad so much, and getting to know him feels like getting to know more of myself. And also, he's not somebody that I can be super close to and still feel safe. And so I've had to hold a boundary to take good care of myself. And it's like sometimes it's a little heartbreaking, right? Of like, I wish I didn't have to, but it's the thing that I need to do to keep myself safe. And so probably that one, because I wrestle with it so much, of like, I always hold out the hope that or the wish that it could be different, knowing that it can't. And I think that's so painful.
Yes. And it's something that we just continue to mourn as we continue to live. Like we wish it was different, and we know it isn't. Yeah. And yet you still have to choose you, which that is like a profound internal boundary to be able to. So go you.
Thanks. Yeah, I see him 4 times a year in a public place. So I'm like, that's my commitment.
Yep. I feel that, sister. But good for you for being so specific about it. So tell everyone where they can find the ambition trap, how to stop chasing and start living. Look how pretty it is, YouTubers.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for having me and for sharing your platform with me. You are amazing, and your work is referenced in the book. So I'm just beyond grateful for you and your contribution.
Sure.
And you all can find the book everywhere you buy books, whether that's your favorite local indie bookstore or a national chain. It is everywhere, The Ambition Trap.
And where can we find you?
You can learn more about me on my website, AminaAlTai.com. I'm sure the spelling will be in the show notes, and it's the same on Instagram.
Yes, it will. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. I so appreciate the work that you're doing, really. Thank you.
Thank you so much.